does the UK have the capacity to take in a lot more than what the government has extended?
Yeah, of course it does. And also Europe does as well. And I think they have raised, in the latest proposal, is to let in 200,000 rather than 120,000. But the problem, of course, lies in the Middle East itself. As long as the state fails, the state is collapsed in Syria, you're going to get a flood of refugees. Already, I think, 5 million have fled Syria alone. And if you add them all up, you've got 15 million knocking on the gates of Europe. Now, we can't, I mean, there's no way we can let in that many without grave social disturbance.
In a Project Syndicate column, you wrote, quote, "The nature and scale of this exodus have rendered all previous legal and political assumptions about migration obsolete." There's the quote right there. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that we used to distinguish between economic migrants and asylum seekers, and those were, they were two categories we knew about. But we never had a category of refugees. Because the refugees aren't subject to particular acts of torture. It's just that their states have collapsed. And therefore they live in conditions of incredible insecurity, and therefore they flee the country. We've never had legal basis for dealing with those.
Something you pointed out in your column is that Europe isn't particularly well suited to deal with this situation right now because it lacks cohesiveness, because it's still not a single political entity. Can you expand on what you mean by that, and also what kind of steps might Europe take, you know, in the grand scheme of things, to become more of a single unit?
Well, it lacks the ability to take any decisions about the Middle East itself. It can't actually pursue a coherent policy to try and bring peace to Syria. I mean, the only countries that can do that are really America and Russia, and they can't get together because they can't agree on the role of Bashar Assad. And I think the Russians are quite right. He's got to have a role in the transition, and the Americans won't accept that. And I think the Europeans won't accept that either. But the Europeans don't really matter. So there's no basis for a political settlement. As for the second point, how can Europe get more cohesive? Well, you know, you ask who the heck knows? I mean, they have lots of paper plans, but basically they're a community of 23 nations, and they can't agree on anything that really matters in the realm of politics.
You talk to people, do you see any impetus or energy going towards that, or you just think there's no momentum towards a more integrated Europe at the moment?
I don't think there's very much momentum towards an integrated Europe. There might have been had the Eurozone worked out, but the problems of the Eurozone have really dented and dimmed the whole European project.
Do you see the refugee crisis affecting the British referendum coming up on whether to stay part of the EU?
I don't think that's going to be so critical. I think the immigration problem, which has caused the rise of UKIP in Britain, has been intra-European. It's been Europeans coming to Britain rather than Syrians, because no Syrians have arrived.
Right.